We just got our first look at Absolute Riddler, Absolute Penguin, and Absolute Two-Face in the newest issue of Absolute Batman. And we're about to cover the entire issue for you guys from start to finish.
Peak fiction incoming.
So if you guys don't remember, the last issue consisted of Bane's origin story, where we found out that he was literally born on a battlefield in the midst of war among a group of rebels that was led by his father and fighting for the island of Santa Prisca's freedom. But upon growing up and taking over leadership of the rebellion himself, Bane eventually turned on his father and killed him in broad daylight upon making a deal with the Joker that guaranteed Santa Prisca would prosper. Nevertheless, as time continued passing, Bane would start carrying out acts of terrorism for the Joker to fulfill the other part of their agreement, an agreement that allowed Bane to ensure his family on Santa Prisca would always have a happy and safe place to live. Now, we also got to see what Alfred predicted would become of Bruce if he wasn't able to defeat Bane, which was basically a Batman-Bane hybrid being pumped up with loads of venom. But upon finding out that that was just a prediction, we then saw that the first stage of Bane's plan to lure Bruce out from hiding was going after all of his closest friends. This issue, on the other hand, picks up with Bruce huffing and puffing inside of a sewer system while in complete disbelief that Croc chose to save him. But eventually Croc expressed that Bruce needed to return the favor by saving him, which Bruce interpreted as helping him find a cure. But to the reader's surprise, it wasn't even close to finding a cure, because Wayan was so disgusted with what they had turned him into that he actually wanted Bruce to kill him, stating that the hunger he experienced while in this new form was much too painful to bear. So Bruce pulled out one of the knives inside of his bat ears before slowly lifting his arms into the air and jamming the knife right next to Wayan's head because he just couldn't bring himself to kill his friend. But refusing to take no for an answer, Wayan would then latch onto Bruce's hand, trying to rip the knife out of Bruce's palm. However, right before he could successfully do so, Bruce regained full control of the blade by booting him directly in the jaw, resulting in Wayan letting out a massive roar of anger and frustration before expressing that he should have left Bruce back at Arc M and then taking off inside the sewers. So Bruce tried calling him back over and promising that they could beat this together, but to his disappointment, he received no response because Wayan wanted nothing to do with him. After that, our story switches things up by giving us a flashback where Bruce and Selina were shopping for condominiums, and after confirming that they wanted to buy it with the real estate agent, they were then given a bit of privacy where Bruce once again expressed that he didn't know how to tell Wayan that he couldn't win his upcoming fight. So Selina insisted that they help him in the same way that they were able to buy the condominium. They stopped playing by the rules. After that, our story jumps back over to present day with Bruce waking up gasping from his sleep in one of his stash houses, where Alfred indicated that he'd been completely out of it for 20 days straight since he found him collapsed on the floor of the stash house. But despite Bruce believing that he wasted way too much time, Alfred claimed that he needed even more time for his body to fully recover, expressing that Bruce probably wouldn't even fully comprehend the things that they did to his body because the weird markings on his back were actually a venom delivery system that was pumping venom directly into his brain and spine. But choosing to ignore Alfred's concerns, Bruce would then get up from his bed and start changing into his clothes before implying that he needed to leave. After that, we see Bruce walking throughout Gotham City in the midst of walking back to his mom's place, but somewhere in the middle of his journey, upon seeing a missing poster with himself on it, he was overwhelmed by surges of venom causing massive amounts of excruciating pain, but knowing that he had to be strong and couldn't succumb to its effects, he continued making his way to his mother's. When he finally made it there, initially Martha thought Jim Gordon was paying her a visit to see how she was holding up. But upon realizing it was actually her son, she immediately dropped whatever she was doing before running to Bruce as fast as possible and slapping him in the face for making her worry for such a long time. But it was only a matter of time before she was wrapping her arms around him as tight as she possibly could, stating that she was almost certain that she was going to receive a phone call soon confirming that Bruce was dead. And what made her even more worried was what ended up happening to Ozzy. But completely unaware that something happened to Ozzy, Bruce immediately went over to Gotham's main hospital, where he was greeted by Jim Gordon and Commissioner Bullock, expressing that they were only letting him inside as a favor for his mother Martha. Nevertheless, as soon as he got into Ozzy's room, Dr. Tompkins tried warning him of what he was about to see because she'd never seen anything like it before. But desperate to find out what exactly was wrong with him, Bruce insisted that she just let him see, which is when it's revealed that Ozzy was completely disfigured and swollen everywhere around his body, which according to Dr. Tompkins was because whoever did this to him broke nearly every bone in his body. And as she continued explaining things in further detail, the story then gives us a glimpse of Bane grabbing Ozzy by the throat, slamming him into the ground, and breaking nearly every bone in his body, but in a way that was so precise that none of his vital organs were impacted. And apparently Ozzy, if he even managed to survive, would be almost 2 feet shorter than he used to be, and his hands and feet would remain completely mutilated. After that, that Bruce was visibly heartbroken, but after expressing that he'd do whatever he could to make things better, he then asked Dr. Tompkins if Harvey had paid Ozzy a visit yet. But Dr. Tompkins was confused with what he meant by that because Harvey was actually in the room next door. That's when we realized that Bruce left to the hospital before letting his mother finish what she was saying, because it wasn't just Ozzy who was in terrible condition, it was Bruce's entire friend group from top to bottom, and Harvey's injuries were no less painful than Ozzy's because Bane not only burned the entire left side of his body, but cracked his skull right down the center, which basically left his head in two separate parts when he was eventually discovered by the police. And despite Bruce feeling so incredibly guilty for dragging his friends into this mess, Harvey only made him feel even more guilty when he started talking by implying that he should have stopped hanging out with him and the guys a long time ago, before stressing that he only hated him half the time though while flipping a plastic poker chip. Nevertheless, it wasn't long before Bruce decided it was time to check up on Eddie, who surprisingly never got checked into a medical facility, because upon Bruce entering his lab and asking him if he was doing okay, Eddie indicated that he was completely fine and in the process of getting some work done. So Bruce let out a huge sigh of relief, stating that he was so happy that Bane didn't hurt him as well, to which Eddie agreed shortly after, then emphasizing that Bane was a true gentleman who challenged him to a friendly battle of wits where Bane would allow him to kill him if he ended up winning the so-called battle. But as it turned out, it was only 1 minute before Bane was outsmarting him before slamming his brain into his skull over and over again. And as Eddie continued elaborating, Bruce got closer and closer to him, knowing that something had to be wrong, until it's finally revealed that Eddie was now part human and part machine, thanks to his eyes and brain being altered and fused with his old robot Al, a robot that apparently contained about 4/5 of all human knowledge. So Bruce stressed that he needed to get to a hospital as soon as possible, but unfortunately Eddie was unwilling to go because he was content with his new transformation. That's when our story jumps back over to yet another flashback with Bruce and Selena. However, this time they were in the midst of a conversation about Wayan with the Falcons, because apparently Bibbo Babowski, the fighter that Wayan was soon to be up against, was one of their guys. So Bruce and Selena wanted to see if they could strike some sort of deal with them in hopes of Wayan having a better shot at winning the fight, offering the Falcons a duffel bag of the finest gold in the city. However, it wasn't just any gold, but gold that the Falcons already owned, that Bruce and Selena had stolen from one of their apartments. But before seeing how that would play out, the story then brings us back over to present day, with Batman in the midst of another conversation, this time with the rumored Red Hood gang. However, whoever he was talking to in the Red Hood gang, whether it be this universe's Jason Todd or somebody else, was extremely angry because Bruce was telling them to stand down, implying that he had planned on doing something with them in a previous interaction, but eventually had a change of heart. Moments later, upon ending the call though, Bruce began slamming his fist into one of the desks, absolutely furious with how Bane had mistreated his friends. So Alfred expressed that he may have broken them, but Bruce couldn't allow Bane to break himself because there was no going back now. The two of them would then continue prepping themselves for battle for Bane's inevitable return, but in the process of preparation, someone triggered the alarm, making them believe that Bane had already arrived. So Bruce pulled out his battle axe and Alfred pulled out an entire freaking minigun, but upon demanding Bane to show himself, Alfred was wrapped up by some sort of rope before being yanked up into the air, dropped back onto the ground, and neutralized by a combination of kicks and punches. And that's when Bruce was completely caught off guard because it wasn't Bane they were dealing with at all. It was actually none other than Selena Kyle, aka Catwoman. But sadly, that's when this issue comes to an end, but if you want to see what happens next, let me know in the comments down below.